We use averages all the time to understand the world. Average salary, average house price, average test score. But the average can often give you a completely misleading picture of what's actually going on. And once you see why, you'll start to question every average you hear. In this video, I'm going to show you the difference between the most common types of averages, like the mean and the median, and why choosing the wrong one can give you a completely distorted view of reality. When most people hear the word average, they naturally assume that the average represents a typical value, something that we should strive towards or something that is the normal. We also might feel like this is a fair summary of what is actually going on, that the value itself is a reliable estimate that we should all be trying to achieve, when in reality this is far from the truth. The average, however, is not always telling us the truth. The value can be distorted by a number of factors, for example, outliers, or even the value of the average we are calculating. Are we calculating the wrong average instead? The problem is that not all averages behave in the same way, and depending on the data and how that data is distributed, the average can be pulled towards one or the other direction, and this is influenced by outliers. So, let's actually define what some of these averages mean. We will start off with the mean. The mean is what most people think of as an average. This is where you add up everything and divide by how many values there actually are. The mean is fantastic to use in examples where averages are expected to be close together. For example, taking average temperatures of certain events, or test scores where you're not expecting any outliers. The median, however, is different, and it works in a very different way. The median is where we start with every number ordered from lowest to highest, and it is the middle value out of that list. A good example as to where we use the median could be house prices, because some houses are a lot more expensive than others, hence would be outliers, whereas the majority of houses will be around about the same price. So, in context, the mean tells you the mathematical centre, but the median tells you what's typical. The mean includes outliers within the average. However, the median normally gets rid of outliers as it's only a few pieces of the total data, where in reality, the rest of the data will actually group together. Let's put this in an example. With the following values, the mean is pulled up by the very high value, but the median stays closer to what most people within this dataset actually earn. So the mean tells us the mathematical centre, but the median tells you what the typical centre is of this specific set. This is why headlines can be very misleading when they say the average salary or the average house price is a certain amount. The average isn't always the number that you are looking for. If you only look at the mean, you might think that the average is very high because outliers very heavily distort the mean. However, if we only look at the median, you are taking the middle person in the entire population or the entire housing market to take your information out of. So, when we are making decisions, we need to be considering what average we are taking and why we're taking that particular average. So, the key point is there isn't just one average. There are several different ways to summarize data, and each one tells you something slightly different. We haven't even covered the mode, the range, standard deviation, all other types of averages or ways of representing data. The mode would be our most common value. The range or spread explains how the data is actually spread between the highest and the lowest value. These are other ways that we can consider averages, and depending on the scenario or depending on what we are looking at as our data set, we should always consider more than one type of average. So, the clearer way to think about averages is this. The mean gives you a mathematical center point. The median gives you a typical value. Yet neither of them tell the full story on their own. If you found this useful, in this video I look at the concept of how risk does not equal danger and why most people confuse them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you there.